The Battle of Armageddon.
Revelation chapter 16 verses 13 to 16. Then I saw three impure spirits that looked like frogs. They came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. They are demonic spirits that perform signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world, to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty. Look, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed, so as not to go naked and be shamefully exposed. Then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Old Testament end times prophecy of Armageddon. Napoleon called the geographical Armageddon the greatest natural battlefield in the world. But the fact is that no one knows exactly where the battlefield is located. Most likely the valley extends for some 15 to 20 miles north and south in the northern part of present-day Israel. The Book of Daniel provides some of the foundational truths that make up any study of the end times. In Daniel 2, God's plan for the Gentile nations begins with King Nebuchadnezzar and follows the historical sequence of human governments from him to a 10-nation confederacy during the end times, which occupies the area of the old Roman Empire. The Antichrist will gain control of these nations and, after guaranteeing Israel's peace and security, will break that treaty 3.5 years later and will launch an attack against Israel. In Daniel 9, God's plan of 490 years for Israel predicts to the very day on April 6, 30 AD, when the Messiah will enter Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. This time period begins with the decree from Persia to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. This time period lasts for 483 years, so there is one 7-year time period left. On Palm Sunday, God stopped the prophetic clock with 7 years to go. The clock will restart when the Antichrist makes his peace treaty with Israel. The first 3.5 years are peaceful between the 10-nation coalition in Israel. Although, during this time, Israel may be under attack from Rosh, a nation that lies due north of Jerusalem. The Antichrist breaks the treaty after 3.5 years, and then all hell breaks loose with what is called the time of Great Tribulation. This is the time of the 7 seals of man's destruction upon himself, the 7 trumpets of Satan's destruction on mankind, and finally, the 7 bowls of God's wrath which are poured out on mankind. At what point during this time will the rapture occur? Some argue at the beginning of the 7 years, some argue in the middle of the 7 years, and some argue at the end of the 7-year tribulation. 7 events that will take place during the Battle of Armageddon. Number 1. Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. In Ezekiel chapter 37, the vision of dry bones coming together to make a skeleton and being covered with flesh and then coming alive is a prediction of the Jewish people coming together from places all over the world to become a living, breathing soul. This prediction became a reality in 1948 with Jews all over the world returning to Israel and establishing a nation. Number 2. The Gog and Magog Invasion into Palestine. Ezekiel chapter 38 verses 1 to 4. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, prophesy against him and say, This is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. In Genesis chapter 10 verses 2 to 3, Magog, Meshech, and Tubal, sons of Japheth, son of Noah, migrated to the area of modern-day Russia. Magog means the chief prince, or prince of Rosh. Rosh is the old root word for the name Russia. Meshech corresponds to the old name for the capital of Western Russia, which is today the city of Moscow. Tubal was the ancient name of one of the dominant Asiatic provinces of Russia. Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 15. You will come from your place in the far north. Moscow is directly north of Israel. Ezekiel chapter 38 verses 5 to 6 identifies the rest of the participants of the Battle of Armageddon. Regarding these nations we know, Gomer is located in modern Turkey. Beth Togarmah is also located in modern Turkey. Persia is modern-day Iran. Cush is modern-day Sudan. and Put as modern-day Libya. Number 3. Magog's decision to invade Israel. Ezekiel chapter 38 verses 14 to 16. Therefore, Son of man, prophesy and say to Gog, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In that day, when my people Israel are living in safety, will you not take notice of it? You will come from your place in the far north, you and many nations with you, all of them riding on horses, a great horde, a mighty army. You will advance against my people Israel like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, Gog, I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me when I am proved holy through you before their eyes. This occurs at a time when Israel dwells in peace. When is that? Probably during the first 3.5 years before the Antichrist breaks his treaty with Israel. At that time, the people of Rosh from the north will seize the opportunity to quickly invade Israel. Rosh and the nations with her will be utterly destroyed by God. These nations will have no part in the Battle of Armageddon, they have already been defeated. In Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, God describes his destruction on Gog and Magog. We see in these verses what seems to eerily describe a nuclear holocaust. Fire and brimstone fall from the sky. The earth shakes. The faces of the invading soldiers melt like hot wax. It takes Israel 7 years to decontaminate the land. The burial of radiation-contaminated men and women injures even more. Thousands of invading soldiers lie unburied. God sends the birds of the air to pluck the flesh right off their bodies. This sounds like Revelation chapter 19 at the Battle of Armageddon. The Antichrist uses this move by Russia against Israel to set up the abomination of desolation and move his forces into Israel. The nations which comprise the land area of the old Roman Empire include England, Scotland, Ireland, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Tunisia, Greece, Macedonia, Belgium, and the Netherlands, among others. Number 4. Rise of the Antichrist. In Daniel chapter 11 verses 36 to 45, 3.5 years into the final 7-year period, the Antichrist places what Jesus called the abomination of desolation in the holy place in the temple in Jerusalem. This is a small statue of the Antichrist which comes alive and desecrates the place of sacrifice. The abomination of desolation compels Jews to worship the Antichrist. This is crucial to his plan for world dictatorship. In Mark chapter 13 verse 14, Jesus said, when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. The Antichrist demands to be worshipped and brands all of his followers with the number 666. John tells us that those who will worship the Antichrist and take the number will avoid economic sanctions but will be doomed to hell. Those who refuse to take the number and won't follow or worship the beast will be put to death as martyrs. In the middle of tribulation, Satan is cast from heaven and personally indwells the Antichrist. The Great Tribulation, the final 3.5 years, has begun. Daniel chapter 11 verses 1 to 9 describes a massive battle between the kings of the south and the north. The king of the north is the Antichrist and the king of the south refers to an Arab-African confederacy. The battles are intense with the king of the south initially victorious. But the Antichrist builds a massive army and moves into Israel and utterly defeats the king of the south and his forces. The Antichrist is in full control of Israel, killing Christians and Jews quickly and mercilessly. Then, tidings from the east warn the Antichrist of a gigantic invasion of the kings of east which comprise an army of 200 million soldiers. In Revelation chapter 9, the Euphrates River impedes the movement of the kings from east. This is the sixth trumpet. In Revelation chapter 16, the sixth cup of God's wrath is poured out as the Euphrates dries up and allows the kings of the east to march into Israel to battle with the Antichrist. Tidings from the north refers to Russia restored which then returns for a second time to invade Israel. At this point all the armies move into the Middle East and spread out along the entire length and breadth of Israel, with the greatest concentration poised for the fiercest and final battle on the plains of Armageddon. Number 5. The climax of Battle of Armageddon described. Revelation chapter 14 verses 15 to 20. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So, he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel, who had charge of the fire, came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia. Revelation chapter 16 verses 17 to 21. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne, saying, "It is done." Then there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder and a severe earthquake. No earthquake like it has ever occurred since mankind has been on earth, so tremendous was the quake. The great city split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. Every island fled away, and the mountains could not be found. From the sky huge hailstones, each weighing about 100 pounds, fell on people. And they cursed God on account of the plague of hail, because the plague was so terrible. Revelation chapter 6 verse 14. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. The mountains will not be found. This would indicate a complete renovation of the earth, which may be a fulfillment of 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 10. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar, the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare. All of the great cities of the world are going to be judged at that time. Number 6. The second coming of Jesus. In Zechariah chapter 14, Jesus sets foot on the Mount of Olives and a great earthquake takes place which splits Israel from east to west and brings water from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to Jerusalem. There is a fault line that runs from the Mount of Olives all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Zechariah chapter 14 verses 12 to 13. This is the plague with which the Lord will strike all the nations that fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they are still standing on their feet, their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. On that day people will be stricken by the Lord with great panic. They will seize each other by the hand and attack one another. At the second coming, the non-believing Jews of Israel will see the nail prints in Jesus' hands, feet, and side and realize that they crucified their Messiah. Zechariah chapter 12 verse 10. I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. Number 7. The 2 suppers of God at the end of time. The wedding supper of the Lamb. Revelation chapter 19 verse 9. Then the angel said to me, "Write this. Blessed are those who are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb." And he added, "These are the true words of God." The supper of God. Revelation chapter 19 verses 17 to 18. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, who cried in a loud voice to all the birds flying in mid-air, "Come, gather together for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals, and the mighty, of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, great and small." Revelation chapters 20 and 21 wrap up the story with the destruction of Satan and his followers, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, the millennium, and the new heaven and the new earth which are designed for eternity.